Did King James really remove 20 books from the Bible? Not quite. All of these books were valued for their historical and instructional purposes.
Imagine holding a Bible, not the one sitting on your nightstand or tucked in a church pew. This one is different. It's heavier, thicker, and it has 81 books instead of 66. It's written in Ge'ez, a language older than Latin, on goatskin parchment, by hand, in a monastery carved into the side of a cliff somewhere in the Ethiopian highlands. And inside it are texts that the rest of Christianity left behind over 1,500 years ago. Books that name the fallen angels who supposedly descended to earth and took human wives. Books that describe a messianic figure called the Son of Man, sitting on a throne of glory, judging all of humanity, written possibly a century before Jesus was born. Books that early church fathers like Tertullian and Clement of Alexandria once treated as scripture. Books that are directly quoted in the New Testament you already know. And yet, most Christians in the West have never read a single word of them. Now, Mel Gibson, the man who made The Passion of the Christ, one of the highest-grossing R-rated films in history, has turned his attention to these Ethiopian texts. He's described them as containing details about Jesus that most Western audiences have simply never encountered. And whether you agree with Gibson's interpretation or not, it's reignited a question that scholars have been wrestling with for centuries. Why does the Ethiopian Bible have more books? What's actually in them? And were these texts deliberately left out? Or did they simply survive in one place and disappear everywhere else? I'm David Donaldson, and you're watching the David Donaldson channel. In this video, we're going to explore the Ethiopian Bible in full, what it contains, why it's different, how it was preserved for nearly 2 millennia, and what these missing texts actually say. We'll uncover the story of a Scottish adventurer who risked everything to bring one of these books back to Europe. We'll look at what the Dead Sea Scrolls revealed about these texts, and we'll examine the specific passages that have fascinated and unsettled scholars for generations. To understand the Ethiopian Bible, you first need to understand the church that preserved it. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church is one of the oldest continuous Christian institutions on the planet. It traces its origins to the 4th century AD, when a young man named Frumentius, a Christian from Tyre, in what is now Lebanon, was shipwrecked on the coast of the Red Sea along with his brother Adesius around 316 AD. They were captured and brought as slaves to the royal court of the Kingdom of Axum, one of the great empires of the ancient world, controlling trade routes between the Roman Empire and India. Frumentius rose through the court, eventually becoming secretary and treasurer to the king. When the king died, the widowed queen asked Frumentius to stay and tutor the young prince, Izana. Frumentius used that position to introduce Christianity to the future king. He later traveled to Alexandria, Egypt, where the famous patriarch Athanasius consecrated him as the first bishop of Axum around 328 AD. He returned to Ethiopia, baptized King Izana, and Christianity became the state religion. Ethiopians still call him Abba Salama, Father of Peace, and Kasade Birhan, Revealer of Light. Now here's what matters for our story. When Ethiopian scholars began translating scripture into Ge'ez, their ancient liturgical language, between the 4th and 7th centuries, they didn't use the same source texts that Western churches would later rely on. They drew heavily from the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, which itself included texts not found in the later Hebrew canon. And because Ethiopia developed its Christian tradition partially outside the Roman and Byzantine canon standardization process, its scholars preserved texts that were circulating widely among early Christians and Jews, but would later be excluded elsewhere. The result? While the Protestant Bible has 66 books and the Catholic Bible has 73, the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible has 81. Some counts go as high as 88, depending on how you classify certain liturgical and ecclesiastical texts. This isn't some modern addition. The Fetha Nagast, an Ethiopian legal code dating back to the 13th century, already lists the canon as 81 books. These texts have been continuously read, studied, and treated as sacred scripture in Ethiopia for well over 1,000 years. So what's in these extra books? The Ethiopian canon includes everything found in Western Bibles, all 39 books of the Old Testament, all 27 books of the New Testament. plus the deuterocanonical books that Catholics recognize: Tobit, Judith, Wisdom of Solomon, Sirach, and Baruch. But then it goes further. The most significant additions are 3 texts found only in the Ethiopian canon. First, the Book of Enoch, known as First Enoch. This is probably the most famous of the Ethiopian extra books, and the one that has generated the most scholarly debate. It's attributed to Enoch, the great-grandfather of Noah, the man described in Genesis 5:24 as someone who walked faithfully with God. Then he was no more, because God took him. One of only 2 people in the Hebrew Bible said to have been taken directly by God without dying. Second, the Book of Jubilees, sometimes called Little Genesis. This text retells the stories of Genesis and part of Exodus, but organized into 50-year cycles called Jubilees, with additional details not found in the standard biblical accounts. Third, the 3 books of Maccabean. Despite sharing a name with Maccabees, these are entirely different texts, unique Ethiopian narratives with no parallel in Greek or Latin traditions. The Ethiopian New Testament also includes ecclesiastical texts like the Synodos and Didaskalia, collections of early church canons, apostolic constitutions, and theological treatises that other traditions classify separately from Scripture. But it's the Book of Enoch that has attracted the most attention, and for good reason. The Book of Enoch is not a single text. It's a compilation of 5 separate works, written by different authors over several centuries, likely between the 3rd century BC and the 1st century AD, during what scholars call the Second Temple period of Jewish history. Part 1 is the Book of the Watchers, chapters 1 through 36. This is the section that deals with the fallen angels. It expands dramatically on that brief cryptic passage in Genesis 6, where the sons of God took human wives and produced the Nephilim. In Enoch, these angels are called the Watchers, 200 of them, led by a figure named Shemihaza. They descend to Mount Hermon, take human women as wives, and father a race of giants, the Nephilim, who grow to enormous size and begin devouring everything in sight. But the corruption doesn't stop there. Each Watcher teaches humanity a different forbidden art. Azazel teaches metalworking and weapons of war. Shemihaza teaches sorcery. Barachiel teaches astrology. Armaros teaches how to break enchantments. The text reads like an indictment, a charge sheet explaining how specific angels corrupted specific aspects of human civilization. God responds by sending 4 archangels. Raphael binds Azazel and casts him into a pit of jagged rocks in the desert. Gabriel pits the Nephilim against each other in wars that destroy them. Michael captures Shemihaza and the remaining Watchers and imprisons them in the abyss until the final day of judgment. Part 2 is the Book of Parables, chapters 37 through 71. And this is where things get really interesting for anyone studying the origins of Christianity. This section introduces a figure called the Son of Man, also referred to as the Chosen One, the Anointed, and the Righteous One. This figure sits on a throne of glory, judges the deeds of the wicked, strikes down corrupt kings and rulers, and is described as a light to the nations. He is said to have been chosen before the creation of the world. Sound familiar? Jesus uses the title Son of Man over 80 times in the Gospels. And the language in 1st Enoch about this figure, sitting on a throne, judging humanity, having been chosen before the world began, maps remarkably closely onto how the New Testament describes Jesus. Now, to be very clear, scholars are divided on what this means. The Book of Parables is generally dated to around the late 1st century BC or early 1st century AD, roughly contemporary with Jesus' lifetime. Some scholars, like those at the 3rd Enoch Seminar held in Camaldoli, Italy in 2005, have argued that the ideas in the parables influenced the early Palestinian Jesus movement. Others maintain that both the parables and the gospel writers were drawing independently on the same prophetic tradition in Daniel 7, where the phrase, "one like a son of man," first appears. And there's a crucial twist. In chapter 71, when Enoch himself is brought before God's throne, an angel tells him, "You are the Son of Man." From the perspective of the text's author, these messianic prophecies are about Enoch, not Jesus. As biblical scholar David Wilbur has noted, This directly contradicts the New Testament's identification of Jesus as the Son of Man, which is one reason mainstream Christianity never treated 1st Enoch as inspired scripture. Part 3 is the astronomical book, chapters 72 through 82, a detailed treatise on the movements of the sun, moon, and stars. Part 4 is the Book of Dream Visions, chapters 83 through 90, an allegorical history of Israel using animals to represent people. Part 5 is the Epistle of Enoch, chapters 91 through 108, containing ethical instruction and prophecy. It's a substantial body of work, and the question of whether it belongs in the Bible or alongside it has been debated since the early centuries of Christianity. Here's something that surprises a lot of people. The Book of Enoch isn't just an obscure ancient text sitting in Ethiopian monasteries. It is directly quoted in the New Testament, in a book you can find in any Bible on earth. The Epistle of Jude, verses 14 and 15. Jude, traditionally identified as a brother of Jesus, writes, "Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied about these men," and then delivers a passage that closely matches 1 Enoch, chapter 1, verse 9. The passage describes God coming with 10,000s of his holy ones to execute judgment on the ungodly. Jude doesn't say, "as it is written somewhere," or "according to tradition." He attributes it specifically to Enoch, the seventh from Adam, and calls it prophecy. This isn't the only connection. 2 Peter 2:4 refers to angels who sinned being sent to chains of darkness, language that parallels the punishment of the Watchers in 1 Enoch. 1 Corinthians 11:10 may also contain allusions to the Watchers tradition, and Bible scholar Simon Gathercole has suggested that Luke 10:18, where Jesus says, "I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven," may draw on the cosmology of 1 Enoch's account of the Watchers' descent. Tertullian, writing around 200 AD, argued that the Jews had rejected 1 Enoch precisely because it contained prophecies pointing to Jesus. Clement of Alexandria and the author of the Epistle of Barnabas both treated it with the authority typically reserved for Scripture. So why was it eventually excluded from most canons? Several factors converged. The text's apocalyptic imagery became less popular as Christianity became the established religion of the Roman Empire. The lack of a Hebrew original made some Jewish and Christian authorities skeptical, and the attribution to a pre-flood patriarch made it easy to classify as pseudepigraphal, a false attribution, since the actual authors were likely Second Temple Jewish scribes, not the biblical Enoch. But in Ethiopia, none of those arguments gained traction. The Ethiopian church had received these texts early, translated them into Ge'ez, integrated them into liturgical life, and never had reason to remove them. Ethiopia's geographic and political isolation from Rome and Constantinople meant it was never subject to the same canon standardization pressures. The text simply stayed. For centuries, European scholars knew that 1 Enoch existed. They had the quotations in Jude, references in the Church Fathers, and fragmentary Greek passages. But the full text had been lost to the West since the Middle Ages. Attempts to acquire a copy from Ethiopia had repeatedly failed. That changed because of a Scottish explorer named James Bruce. Bruce was born in 1730 in Kinnaird, Scotland, a wealthy laird who spoke 13 languages, including Arabic and Ge'ez. His ambition was to discover the source of the Nile, and in 1768 he set out from Alexandria on one of the most extraordinary journeys of the 18th century. He spent years traveling through North Africa and Ethiopia, surviving shipwreck, dysentery, armed conflict, and captivity. He reached the Ethiopian royal court at Gondar, won the trust of Emperor Tekle Hamenot II and the powerful Ras Mikhail Sehul, and spent considerable time studying Ethiopian manuscripts and church traditions. When Bruce finally returned to Europe in 1773, he carried with him 3 copies of the Book of Enoch in the original Ge'ez. He presented one to King Louis XV of France. It now resides in the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris. He gave a second to the Bodleian Library at Oxford. The third he kept, and it was added to the Bodleian collection after his death in 1794. He also presented a 4th copy to Pope Clement XIV during a visit to Rome in December 1773, a detail only recently uncovered by scholar Gabriele Boccaccini in 2018. These manuscripts marked the beginning of modern studies on the Book of Enoch. The first English translation was published in 1821 by Richard Lawrence, a professor at Oxford, working from Bruce's Bodleian copy. It caused a sensation. Scholars could finally read the full text that Jude had quoted, that Tertullian had championed, and that an entire branch of Christianity had treated as Holy Writ for over a millennium. But perhaps the most remarkable confirmation came in the 20th century. When the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered at Qumran beginning in 1947, Aramaic fragments of 1st Enoch were found in Cave 4, designated 4Q201 and 4Q204. These fragments, dating to the 2nd and 1st centuries BC, confirm that the Book of Enoch was not some medieval Ethiopian creation. It was an ancient Jewish text predating the New Testament, circulating in Palestine during the time of Jesus. The Ethiopians hadn't invented anything. They had simply kept what everyone else had thrown away. So where does Mel Gibson fit into all of this? Gibson, who has described himself as very Christian and calls Scripture verifiable history, has recently drawn public attention to the Ethiopian Bible, suggesting it contains details about Jesus that most Western audiences have never encountered. His 2004 film, The Passion of the Christ, grossed over $370 million against a $30 million budget and remains one of the most financially successful religious films ever made. Reports suggest his upcoming project, The Resurrection of the Christ, may explore perspectives informed by these broader textual traditions. Social media amplified Gibson's comments into viral headlines about hidden scriptures and suppressed descriptions of Jesus, and it's worth being precise about what the Ethiopian texts do and don't contain. The Ethiopian Bible does not contain a secret physical description of Jesus. Canonical scripture across all traditions provides minimal physical detail about Jesus' appearance. The prophetic language in Isaiah 53, that he had no beauty or majesty, is theological poetry, not a portrait. What the Ethiopian texts do contain is a broader theological framework, particularly through 1st Enoch and the Book of Jubilees, that fills in context around concepts central to the New Testament: the origin of evil, the nature of fallen angels and demonic spirits, the role of a pre-existent messianic figure, the mechanics of divine judgment, the cosmic struggle between righteousness and corruption. These aren't alternative gospels with a different Jesus. They're the intellectual and spiritual landscape into which Jesus was born. Texts that his contemporaries were reading, that his brother Jude quoted, that early church leaders treated as authoritative. The real significance isn't that something was hidden, it's that something was preserved in one of the most isolated Christian communities on earth, while the rest of the world moved on. One more thing about Ethiopia that's worth knowing. The Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion in Aksum, the very church believed to have been founded during King Ezana's reign in the 4th century, claims to house the original Ark of the Covenant. According to Ethiopian tradition laid out in the Kebra Nagast, the Glory of Kings, Menelik I, the son of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, brought the Ark from Jerusalem to Ethiopia. A single guardian monk is appointed for life to watch over the Ark. He is chosen by his predecessor before death. He lives in the chapel, praying before it and offering incense, for the rest of his days. No one else is permitted to see it. No international scholars have been allowed to examine it. Whether you believe the Ark is truly there or not, the tradition tells you something important about this church. For nearly 2,000 years, the Ethiopian Orthodox community has operated with a profound sense of custodianship, a belief that they are guardians of something the rest of the world has lost. And when it comes to the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, and the broader 81-book canon, that belief turned out to be historically justified. The Ethiopian Bible isn't a conspiracy. It isn't a secret. And it isn't some newly discovered collection of lost scriptures. It's a living tradition, read, chanted, and studied in thousands of churches across Ethiopia and Eritrea, as it has been for centuries. What makes it remarkable is not that it contradicts the Christianity most of the world practices. It doesn't. The core gospel, the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, is fully represented in the Ethiopian New Testament, identical to every other Christian tradition. What makes it remarkable is what it adds. 39 million Ethiopian Christians wake up in a world where the Book of Enoch is scripture, where the Watchers who descended to Mount Hermon, the Nephilim who terrorized humanity. 39 million Ethiopian Christians wake up in a world where the Book of Enoch is scripture, where the Watchers who descended to Mount Hermon. And when it comes to the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, and the broader 81-book canon, that belief turned out to be historically justified. The Ethiopian Bible isn't a conspiracy. It isn't a secret. And it isn't some newly discovered collection of lost scriptures. It's a living tradition, read, chanted, and studied in thousands of churches across Ethiopia and Eritrea, as it has been for centuries. What makes it remarkable is not that it contradicts the Christianity most of the world practices. It doesn't. The core gospel, the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, is fully represented in the Ethiopian New Testament, identical to every other Christian tradition. What makes it remarkable is what it adds. 39 million Ethiopian Christians wake up in a world where the Book of Enoch is scripture, where the Watchers who descended to Mount Hermon, the Nephilim who terrorized humanity, and the cosmic Son of Man who sits on a throne of glory, are not fringe theology. They're Sunday reading. It forces a question that has no comfortable answer. Who decided what belongs in the Bible, and who decided what doesn't? The Ethiopian church was there from almost the very beginning. It had access to the same texts, often earlier versions. It preserved them faithfully, and it never saw a reason to remove them. Maybe the real story isn't about what's missing from the Ethiopian Bible. Maybe it's about what's missing from everyone else's. If this video opened your eyes to something you didn't know before, consider subscribing for more deep dives into the stories hidden beneath the surface of our world. I'm David. Thanks for watching.